without Rio. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Isabel Duron, and I'm the Great Wall Research Director and Operations Director here at Spark. We are also live streaming this talk tonight, so thank you so much for those who are joining online. We are holding this talk at Spark's main gallery in Venice, our base of operations, which is housed in this old Venice jail that we've sought to transform over Spark's 46-year history in this space. A space that we've transformed to empower young artists and mural makers and those coming from historically marginalized communities. Since its inception, Spark has been involved in the production of the Great Wall of Los Angeles, a half-mile-long mural in the Tujunga Wash, and which we're currently working to extend to another half-mile, which will highlight LA history from the 1960s to the 2000s. We're currently operating at 3 sites, here at Venice, at LACMA, and at Bergamot. And so now I want to turn the mic over to Rio, our curator, who's going to share a little bit more about our current show and upcoming exhibitions.
Thank you, Isabel, and welcome to the Duron Gallery. The Great Wall of Los Angeles exhibitions aim to take the viewers behind the scenes into this iconic mural's expansion. Following its debut at the Jeffrey Deitch Gallery, the Great Wall of Los Angeles, a tattoo where the river once ran, is on display here at the Duron until June 2nd. This exhibit features the first from the 1960 section, The End of Jim Crow and Why Alcatraz Matters, from the 1970 section, a complete 1960s sketch narrative and coloration studies offer a glimpse into the forthcoming expansion of the Great Wall. This exhibition runs in conjunction with Painting in the River of Angels at LACMA, where the Great Wall artist team has transformed the museum into a studio. Currently, 2 sections of the mural of the 1960s depicting the Chicano movement and Watts Renaissance are being painted live. This evocative exhibition has captivated audiences with its profound exploration of memory and place and has been extended until June 21st. Mark your calendars for our upcoming show here at the Duron, Exploring Metaphors, the creative process of the Great Wall of LA, opening June 14th. For the first time, we will feature the 1970s narrative and dive into the intricate research sketch development process and innovative compositional techniques that bring this monumental artwork to life. At the Great Wall Institute at Bergamot, explore the local to the global, featuring panels from the World Wall and vibrant colorations from the 1960s expansion. This exhibition runs until June 23rd. Lastly, this summer, we will open a dynamic painting studio exhibition and invite the public to witness the ongoing creation of the Great Wall mural. Join us as we bring this narrative artwork into the present, painting a total of half a mile, experience these extraordinary artistic journeys, and witness the evolution of a monument. Thank you.
Thank you, Rio. I'm going to be moderating tonight's conversation with Kim Martinez and Judy Baca, Spark's artistic director. So we're so pleased and honored to be able to have this conversation today, and exciting to hear, more about your collaborative relationship. So V. Kim Martinez, MFA, is a distinguished professor of painting and drawing in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Utah since 2001. Her wide-ranging research interests encompass painting and drawing, encaustic painting, community murals, foundry, mosaics, and video animation. Martinez earned her terminal degree from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she was awarded the George L. and Anne Roman Siegel Foundation Fellowship. As an educator, Martinez is deeply committed to public engagement through the arts. She pioneered a community mural art course in 2002, providing students with hands-on experience in creating public art throughout Salt Lake City. Martinez has secured grants from various organizations, facilitating the completion of 46 murals and awarding 204 student travel scholarships. Recognized for her innovative teaching methodologies, Martinez leads interdisciplinary experiences at the University of Utah's Taft-Nicholson Center, fostering intellectual growth and experimental painting techniques in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Martinez's contributions extend beyond academia. She has served on numerous community boards and councils, demonstrating her dedication to shared governance philosophy. Kim has an active visual artist record exhibiting locally in Salt Lake City as well as nationally and internationally, and has previously graced the walls of the gallery here at Spark. Her impactful work has been acknowledged with prestigious awards, including the Salt Lake City Murals Visual Artist Award in 2003 and the Governor's Mansion Award in 2021, highlighting her significant influence on the arts landscape in Utah. So welcome, Kim. Dr. Judith F. Baca is an American visual artist who has dedicated over 4 decades to creating impactful public art. Her murals bring art into the daily lives of communities. In 1974, she established Los Angeles's first mural program, which produced over 400 murals, offered employment to thousands, and which evolved into the Social and Public Art Resource Center, Spark. She serves as Spark's artistic director, focusing on digital technology to advocate for social justice and participatory public arts project through the UCLA at Spark Digital Mural Lab. Baca has held teaching positions at UC Irvine and the University of California, Los Angeles, where she was a full professor in the Chicano Studies and World Arts Cultures Department and is currently a professor emeritus. Her art reflects the interconnectedness of history, people, and place, emphasizing diverse struggles for rights and community ties to locations. Her most renowned work is the ongoing Great Wall of Los Angeles, which, as you all know, is currently under expansion. Baca's contributions have earned her prestigious accolades, including the Guggenheim Fellowship and United States Artist Rockefeller Fellowship. She has also received over 50 awards from various community organizations. So, welcome. So to get into it, one of the things that I think people are always interested in having a greater understanding as, the Great Wall is currently under the extension and production process is a little bit about how it all got started and the journey of collaboration. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your artistic journey of collaboration and how you guys came to know each other. And to walk us through a little bit about that relationship that you have had over a number of years.
Well, I think I'll start because I'm a professor at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and it started right after, we invited Judy to come to Salt Lake City through a D grant to do a mural project with me and my students and my colleague, Dr. Beth Krinsky. And she was scheduled to come, and then 9/11 happened. So of course she couldn't come, so we had to wait another year before we could schedule her, and we got her there. And she came in, and we worked on a project together. At that time in Utah, a recent law had been enacted about that students could carry guns on campus, and gay marriage was being
concealed
guns on campus, and gay marriage was being turned down. So we tried, worked on some murals around that. And so with that, I got to know Judy and started working with her. I had started a mural project at the University of Utah. I had just started there about 2 years previously, and I was in a place where it was a commuter campus, and so students really didn't have any connection to one another. And I knew within academia I wanted to build a connection for students. And painters are typically very isolatory. They don't really need each other to help lift paintbrushes or anything. So I decided to start a mural project, and that's why we brought Judy in, so she could help me understand how to do it. I really started out with a couple of buckets of paint I had somebody donate to me, and until Judy showed me how to paint correctly. So that's how it came into, that's how we started this collaboration. And then the problem is Judy hasn't been able to get rid of me since then. I keep, come to LA and work with her I've worked with her a couple of times, and I've been working on the mural with the Great Wall for a couple of years now, long distance. So that's one of the things that's really came out from the pandemic, is that we all know use Zoom now, and so it makes these kind of cross collaborations distance a lot easier to work with. But there's something about being in the space that makes it even more rewarding as an artist and an educator. Because now I'll take this information that I learn here, every time I come here, I take it back to my students, right? So that's what I think, that's what's so great about community art, is that we have this kind of pluralistic goal, and then we share it widely, right? So that's how I got to know Judy.
And I kind of add to this in a sense that when I came to Salt Lake City, I had no idea that I was going to be walking into this conservative landscape of Mormonism, and also, you know, the other side of that story, and that my students that were Kim's students represented both sides of these issues in every case. So it was overwhelming to me to be working with a team that was absolutely anti-gay marriage, and others that were gay activists, and then also to deal with, you know, the notion that concealed weapons were a good idea in the hands of students. The first time I stepped out in front of the audience, I looked out there and I said, well, which one of these people have a concealed weapon? And how is this going to go? How's this going to happen? But what I learned a lot was about Kim's incredible grace. Kim was able to actually, you know, transgress these two different worlds. And I suspect that has to do with your family, right? Your mother's Mormon, your father was he Catholic? Catholic, Mexican and Swedish. So she had to negotiate not only racially, but also in religion. And she did that really beautifully in her classes. So I learned a great deal about public art in Salt Lake City, which was kind of an amazing experience. And also began this discussion with her. So when it came down to doing a piece called Danza de la Tierra, which was a piece that was for Dallas, Texas, and I was dealing with similar issues of, you know, great differences within Dallas, I called Kim. And I had actually two models, one of them sitting in the room here, that couldn't stand her collaborator. We were trying to get them to dance together to be the central figures, right? And they didn't even want to be in the same room together, but so we made them dance together. And they were the models for this. So I actually asked Kim to come and help with the design of that. And we worked together to develop that piece, which is now in Dallas at the Latino Center in Dallas, Texas. So that began this discussion, and since that time, we've had many reasons to discuss how it was going with working with our students and the creation of a program within the university, which is really difficult.
Thank you. Do you want to jump to talking more about the university setting and some of the challenges that you experienced? I know, Kim, you've talked a little bit about you know, bringing the muralism and mural work to, you know, the university setting, and that in the past we've had a conversation very briefly about how Spark kind of informed your artistic process. And so I don't know if you could share a little bit more about that, the challenges you faced.
Oh, sure. You know, because one of the things within a university setting is whenever you have a new idea, you have to get a bunch of people to believe you and let you write the class, and then you have to get somebody to let you offer it. So it takes quite a bit of red tape to even get it going. And then it's a little bit different. A mural class is very different than a drawing class, where people go into a classroom and they sit down and they draw things. Within a mural class, we have 16 weeks to develop and get it on the wall and complete it. Because, you know, one of the things, the way that my curriculum works is I have students come into the class who have never painted a mural in their entire lives. But so I have to teach them about the history of muralism, how to paint it, and then how to design it. And then we have to get it up on the wall, right? Which can be really challenging because we're carrying paints across, you know, we painted all over in hospital settings and in schools, in civic spaces. And, you know, to get the university to understand that that one day a class with that many students is more than just teaching a class. It has to do with a whole lot of different things. It's talking about social justice, right? And so within that classroom, we're dealing with lots of different things that cross over different boundaries. And so one of the things that became really rewarding to me was that while it was designed for art majors, I had students from different disciplines wanting to work with me. So that's been one of the greatest rewards, I think, about using the model that I gained from Judy within this system, because I think that when you are doing something that's truly about community-based art, you're getting lots of different people's ideas and input into it, and so you're making work that is truly about you know, the greater consciousness. You know, I mean, I'm approaching it very similarly to the way that I make artwork as an artist. You know, it's like, if then what? If this is what I'm going to make, then if I do this, what am I going to end up with, right? And I can look at my own work and take that into the public sphere, and we think of our art making in our mural making in very much the same way, and have to have a lot of research support to get it to work, right?
So speaking of research, could you tell us a little bit about the role of research in the artistic design, in each of your respective artistic design processes, and the role of research in the Great Wall and the production of the Great Wall, and how you've been collaborating on that so far?
It's really, really very important as you sit in a room with all these images surrounding us. They are not imaginations that simply come out of my head as the artistic director. They are pieces that come out of defining a moment historically and defining the defining metaphors of a period of time. And I've always begun, even in the earliest segments of the Great Wall, I've come to go, as we've gone through the archives and we found this material, it's shocking how much research was going on even as I began in 1976. There you could see a timeline, and you could see me saying these are the most important events for us to edify within the mural when we were dealing with the early California, for example, and the Chumash and the indigenous peoples. And so research and the analysis of that research became the very beginning, the basis of the thought. And then the process is actually one in which we layer the process of history, because of course, people have said it many times, that history belongs to the victors. So what we're looking at in terms of our historical analysis is within traditional history is an absence of women, an absence of people of color, an absence of the achievements of people that are significant in our own families. And how do you recover that story? Well, there are many ways to recover it. One of them is to interview people and to talk to people. And I find that being one of the most important processes that we use, which is the process of doing an interview and taking from thought leaders, we call these people our thought leaders, and listening to the thought leaders, and then they will say something really profound. They'll say something like, well, I remember Tom Hayden sitting with us in the room, and me saying to Tom Hayden, well, how would you define the 1960s? And given your history, and you and Jane Fonda, and how would you define this period? And he said, one of the funny things, he said, well, it's a lot about who you fall in love with, right? And then he said, the other part of it is really about understanding that we were thousands of young people that were self-described revolutionaries. In other words, defining ourselves as revolutionaries. And that also, we were a generation on fire. So in other words, a group of people that really thought they could change the world. And so those ideas become something, and in fact, the drawing behind me, directly in front of my eyes here, is the generation on fire. It comes directly from his ideas and from his thoughts. So it's not only history that is, an analytical process of looking at historical moments, but looking at the stories of the people who lived through that period. And then that's really defined by age, by gender, by immigration status, by your notion of what your families did, what your families did to participate. So all of these layering becomes a history that's closer to a history that has meaning to the young people we work with, to the communities we serve in the making of the work. And Isabel can say more about research because she's heading our research team right now, and it's quite a job because we're working from the 60s to the contemporary period. And today, we were, again, in our meeting, we listened to clips of interviews with people. And you know, for example, listening to Mama from Mama's Hot Tamales, or listening to one of the South Central farmers who talked about having these heritage seeds. And I could, all of a sudden, the images come directly into my head because I'm hearing what he's saying about 2 walnut trees in the middle of the farm and about the seeds that were heritage seeds that go all the way back to the Mayans, and that's what they were using. And when you destroyed that farm, when the city of LA destroyed that farm, you destroyed the moment for those things to be kept alive and present within the culture. So research is the first step, and that's the step that makes a creative person begin to think about, how do you do this interpretation? And it becomes our story, not the sanctioned story. I used to say that the Great Wall was the alternative history of America. I now do not say that. It is the story of America.
Kim, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that was really powerful. Thank you, Judy. One of the things that I have to say about being a designer on this team that is amazing is this research team. You know, it just, when I start working on design, I can call one of them up and say, what happened here? And they can direct me to where I need to go and to give me references on what I need to find. So they're truly professional and have a great deal of insight that, you know, I would never have been able to find, even if I'd spent 10 days on the internet, because they're doing deep dives into scholarly research that's hidden. So much of it's hidden, and they don't want us to know about it. And I have to say that with the Great Wall in California, the research that's coming out of it that we're able to put on the wall needs to be commended, because not very many communities would allow this research to come forward. Right? I mean, a lot of places we're still fighting to have the research, to have this history shown. And so I think California, by doing these kind of projects, are opening the door for other communities to do it.
It remains to be seen.
Let's hope so.
As the pieces come out and it gets more contemporary, expect censorship.
So speaking a little bit more about the Great Wall, I'm wondering if you both can share more about your experience working on the extension of the Great Wall together and developing new designs. I know that you know, currently our painting team is at LACMA and fielding a lot of community questions and public engagement. And so I'm wondering, you know, what sets, or what are you surprised by in terms of what the general public doesn't understand maybe about mural painting and how it's distinct and unique?
I'm going to start out by giving a little bit of an idea, because I painted with Judy down in the river, right? So, and this was like at the time when the Minutemen were around,
Oh, yeah.
and we were really worried that we were going to get, you know,
Shot.
yeah. So it was really hot. We were worried we were going to get shot. And it was just, you know, and we were, and, you know, then you have the added threat of maybe water's going to carry you away. So it was very hard work. So going into LACMA was like, whoa, this is pretty nice. You know,
We have a restroom.
we have restrooms we can wash our brushes in. And, you know, the scaffolding's nice and sturdy, and it's beautiful, and the lights are great. And it's really great for me to see public engaging in art, because I'm one of the people that thinks that art has a huge effect on individuals and communities. So to see these folks have an opportunity to watch artists in action, and then to have the courage to ask what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then we can give them answers, I think is pretty amazing. And not, again, it's in one of these situations where you just don't see this every day. I mean, how many of us have gone to a museum and seen artists actively making work? It just doesn't happen, especially on this kind of a scale. Right? So, way to go, Judy.
I think I go and say what's surprising to me is the fact that people are just totally engaged. I talk about this day that Ria and I were watching this little girl we were sitting on the scaffolding, we were painting, and there was a little 12-year-old standing down below us. And I looked over the side of the scaffolding and I said, look at that little girl. And then an hour later, I looked over, she was still there, right? And she had a little sketch pad with her. And I said, wow, she must be an artist. So then I looked back over her and I said to her, and I saw her grandmother coming in and out. Her grandmother left her, right, would not take her away. And I said, are you an artist? And she said, I am, and I'm a writer too. So first of all, it was like, and then another young people who said to us, wow, I never knew that girls painted murals, right? So it's this whole thing, we're mixing the gender, we're changing that paradigm. And also, we're making visible something that is thought of as some kind of mystical process. The creative process is, somewhat spiritual, but it isn't mystical. It's not something that's not apparent. We're making that process apparent. And that's one of the most wonderful parts of this. And the other big question over and over is, where did you paint and where did your brush end? I mean, they're trying to figure out what I painted, what others painted. And I said, if you can tell where I painted and someone else began, then I failed. There is no difference where my hand goes and where the next hand comes. What we're doing is we're dancing. None of us out of sync. We're dancing rhythmically and in a connected way. Now, of course, we fail sometimes. We do. Sometimes we screw up and somebody tries to make an opus out of a small section. We try to keep that from happening, and we try to get everybody working in the same rhythm. And that is part of the process. And people also want to know, how do you do this collaboration? How do you collaborate? That's very, very problematic to artists as they're trained within our traditional systems. We're not trained to be collaborators. We're trained to be individual achievers. And the idea that you would somehow hand your brush over to somebody alongside of you to complete something, or that you would share that process, is not something we're taught to do.
So just to also expand on that a little bit, I'm wondering if you could share more about what makes mural painting, and the way that you're all engaged in it different from easel painting, for example, or other things in terms of the collaborations, the artistic collaboration, and how you have to navigate the whole production, right? That it's not just, it doesn't even end from one decade to another, right? That it has to have sort of a seamless flow. So if you can share a little bit more about that.
Well, within my classes, I handle the classes a little bit differently because each of the students will make a design, and then the community gets together and decides which one best reflects what that community stands for. But during the whole process, the classes are working together and throwing ideas back and forth. But it can become a test of somebody's maturity as to how they handle it. Right? Meaning that even though they can have a ownership that it's owned by everyone, and that can be really challenging. So emotionally, I've watched it people going back and forth trying to hold on to it, and you have to go, but you couldn't make this by yourself. You may have had this thought, but this could never happen if you were doing this all by yourself. And so there's a certain amount of that we have to leave our egos at the door for the whole group versus, and so I think Judy's right. It can be difficult. And for some people, they go, I don't ever want to do this again. And other ones go, oh, I've drinking this Kool-Aid. I'm going next on the next big wall, right? So it really tells a lot about the person who wants to do this kind of work, because it isn't for everyone.
I think the other thing about mural painting that is really, it's the physicality of it. It's an athletic event. I mean, it's like, I'm certainly recognizing that as I'm an aging muralist. And last night we came back from the day of the work, and we were like sitting there going, why does everything hurt, right? Why am I so exhausted? And it's like, it's the climbing, it's certainly the climbing, but it's also holding yourself in a position of balance on scaffolding. And that hurts. I mean, you have a tension in your muscles as you're holding yourself in place. And then it's also reaching above your head, and it's moving with your whole body. You're not doing this. if you're painting like that, you aren't doing anything, right? So you're using your arms, you're using a full extension. So it's a physical act. And the other thing about mural painting that is so profoundly different is that when we're painting together, we're not doing our individual painting. These paintings that you see in the room are not necessarily how my paintings on an easel would look. They're different because this is set up in the coloration, the monochromatic, which are those all one color that gives us the three-dimensionality of a mural. And that creates the base painting so that any hand that comes in to put color knows where the color goes. And what is a medium light, what is a dark, what is the highest light. And instead of like, particularly if you have really young people like, 16, 17-year-olds, typically they get a bucket of paint, and they paint like they're painting a room flat and make everything flat, and they disappear everything underneath it. They start to do wall painting, right? With the monochromatic, you can't do that. You paint into the three-dimensionality. And so it's a different painting style than what you would paint on an easel painting that you're going to be looking at really close. And I keep saying, remember, it's 70 feet. You're not going to see these pieces from under 70 feet away in the river. So you're 70 feet away and 23 feet above the lowest area. So we're planning and designing for that distance. And that makes a really big difference in terms of the scale. So, for example, anything under a 1-inch mark of your brush disappears. Make a big red mark under an inch wide. You won't see it from 70 feet. It's gone. So in other words, you've got to begin to understand that you're painting at a scale that has to be seen from great distance. And that gives you a lot of stuff. You get to be really bold, and you get to be a little crazy, and you get to act out on the wall, which I really like. I mean, it kind of deals with my adolescent quality.
Well, and it's another one of those painter's fantasies of being in the painting, because you're literally inside the painting when you're painting that scale, right? So we really love that.
It is really feeling that you're in the color. When you're painting at the Great Wall, you're surrounded by color, and it's like, it ends up getting in your dreams. When you're sleeping at night, you're in this mural, and it's like, come get out of the mural and be in another reality, right?
Or how do I adjust that color just slightly so that it has a little bit more vibrance to it? I mean, because the thing is about these murals is the way that we're painting them. We paint them like 20 times, right? So they're gigantic glazed paintings with the very end, little hits of highlights. But they really are, we paint them so many times.
That's true.
And that's how we get them to work, because then what happens is you can see the light going through each layer and refracting, and so that it just looks like a little jewel on the side of the wall. And that's, I think, the difference between this kind of painting than very jewel-like kind of thing. And that's why it shimmers, and it requires people to put the lines together to see the whole. That makes it really, we're asking the viewer to participate by the way we're painting it, in essence.
The other thing I was going to say is that when we're designing and we're doing the line drawings, we're designing in musical ratios. And this is actually what the Mexicanos called the punto de oro system. And that has to do with ratios, the ratios that divide up space. So that, in other words, there is no figure whose arm juts out or whose head's turned that doesn't go to a point predetermined. That predetermined point is a musical ratio to the next head. And when you get it in the ratio, it snaps into place like a puzzle. Otherwise, it looks discordant. It can look totally chaotic. And so we have to have these sort of musical divisions. And those are planned for the way people stand above the mural and look at it. And you can see, it's really fascinating, is if you go along the Great Wall, you'll see the fence bent, and people putting their camera in the chain link, and they bend it, because we have the wrong fencing up there, right? And I say that comes from the thought that public authorities and the government has, that there's NHH. That's what I call it, my code word for no humans here, right? Because that's how much they disrespect us in our communities. So the little hand marks that have bent the fence so that they can put their camera, and it ends up being on a punto. In other words, they're getting right into the peripheral vision, what they can see from left to right, and I go, wow, they know where the focal point of that segment is. And that's what they're choosing to use with their camera.
And that's why we
fascinating.
have to walk back and forth
Yeah.
across the
Yeah.
murals too.
Yeah.
Because as we look at the murals, they're so big, we can't see them like we see a regular painting on the wall, right? So what does that do? We have to walk in front of
You have
them.
to work with this vision here.
Yeah, and keep moving.
How far out your fingers
Yeah,
can see.
it's pretty
I'm
cool.
seeing my fingers all the way out to here. That's what we're designing. Not an easel. That's a weird thing, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you know, because when you're painting it, I mean, I've had these problems where we paint and I go, these, you know, if you try to set it up like with a regular, you know, vanishing points like you do with an easel, it just doesn't work. Because you stand right here and they go to the vanishing point, but if you stand right there, they don't anymore. So what we have to do is we have to put vanishing points along the horizon line in multiple places, and then we just straighten them out, right? Polyangular perspective is what we call that in mural talk.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I studied in Siqueiros' workshop. Yes. Yes, but not really. What I studied was the ratios and the division of space and composition. Because what they said when they saw the Chicano murals that were coming out of the Southwest, that we didn't understand how to use composition at all. All you do is put an image and plop it in the middle of a wall, right? And I had been guilty of that repeatedly. I didn't know how to set up something. First of all, it's in relationship to the architecture, in relationship to the physicality of this physical space, and to the people to whom with the people with whom you're painting, and the people who you're making the work for. It's all relational. And the maestros were not as good as doing the community part of this. Their interest was the creation of a piece of architecture that would become a school of thought to train the public, the unwashed public. In our sense, I think what we did, within the Chicano mural movement, and particularly within the work I have been doing, is, in a sense, what I think is the feminist aspect of muralism, is that it's more relationship-based. It's more family-based. In other words, you're part of this story. You get to be part of it. You get to be engaged in this big story that is our story, right? And why we are connected. So I think, yes, there is the mathematical end of it, which is the polyangular theory. You know, Siqueiros could take the corner of that room and disappear it. He would use lines in such a way, the corner was gone. Particularly if you look at the Electric Workers Union, if you know his work, it's an amazing study of polyangular theory. We didn't do that as well as in the Chicano movement. But what actually, as we evolved in this process, particularly at the Great Wall, we evolved another method of the engagement in the public in the whole thing from the very beginning. You can help determine what's in this mural. Your story might be here. Your portrait might be here. You might be engaged in this process because you had you're part of that story. So in other words, we took it into a spiritual and a further element than simply the mathematical aspects of it. I think that's more feminist.
But there is this idea too that muralists share the knowledge together, right? So like with my work with Judy, I'm taking the information I have received from her that she learned from Siqueiros, and I'm bringing them to the University of Utah that's taking them out to the Salt Lake City area. So in essence, my goal is to continue the Mexican muralist tradition and the thoughts and philosophies to Utah, right? And then my hope is those students are going to take it out to out into the world too, because we don't want to lose that kind of painting, you know, the formal processes, and then add feminism and all the other things that we've added to it now. And I think that's why because there aren't many books written on it, quite frankly. And we need more. You know, Siqueiros wrote and it's in Spanish, and it's really, really difficult. We have we have a couple of the Chicano muralist movement, but we need more, right, out there in the world.
Eva Cockcroft, Toward People's Art. I mean, when you look at what is out there, there's very few books. and very few bodies of knowledge. And one of the things we're doing right now, and we're just doing it at the same time, trying to make the pieces pretty hard. We're recording what we're doing. We're recording it so that it will be a record of the process. And that will then could be shared with the next generation.
I agree, that needs to happen.
Well, we're working on it, right? And
I know.
hopefully we'll have additional support to do all those kinds of additional, things and projects. Kim, one of the things I was also wondering, I think you made mention of it a little bit earlier, of, that you have take what you learn here from Spark, but also, every time that you come, you take something to the University of Utah. And so I'm wondering, or to Salt Lake City. And so I'm wondering a little bit if you could share about what, you're here with us for 2 weeks. And so if there's anything that's coming to mind of what you've brought from Spark before, or Judy, the artistic process to Utah, like what unique aspects, and if there's anything so far that you're, learning and drawing and going to be taking with you this time.
Well, I think this polytab process is pretty interesting, right? In the whole process of painting the mural in a different space than you're going to put it. Now, as Judy says, part of it is about architectural integration, but we could still do that today, right? So Judy's still taking that into account, even though we're painting in a different place. So I find that that's pretty exciting. And then the other part that I'm fascinated with is how Judy's building the bridge, right? Because she's taking this, three-dimensional form so that it becomes a platform to look at a two-dimensional piece. And I find that fairly fascinating. And how she's going to integrate those two different things. And so that's really what I'm looking forward to learning on this trip, to take back with me.
Do you have some questions from the audience?
Is perspective treated differently?
Yes, I think Kim was articulating that. Yes. Perspective is, it's still the same. Perspective is perspective. It's, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective. You learn that. There's a classic method of learning perspective. However, its application onto a narrative wall that is a mile long is completely different. How do you deal with that? I can't give you 1 point perspective at one end of the wall and have it end half a mile down. So there is no continuance of the same line of perspective. Doesn't work.
Flat plane.
Right.
Because again, perspective is a theoretical thing. It is, it's something that we made, that was invented by artists to make the illusion of space, right? So when you in your eyes, you can only see this far out, like Judy said, right? So once you get beyond your cone of vision, it's going to curve, right? So that's why we have to, because if we took railroad tracks and put them all in the same line in perspective and we stood right in front of it, it'd be 1 point perspective, it'd look great. But walk 10 feet away, it's going to curve.
The viewer is part of what we're taking into account.
So the viewer has to move in order to straighten it out. So that becomes the dynamic process of mural painting, right? You can't sit still. Siqueiros kind of came up with this idea too, because at the time, he was really interested in moving pictures, because this is when the first black and white pictures came into being. So he was thinking about how they move 32 frames per second, right? So that's kind of what his thinking was, the way I understand it anyway.
Well, he used photographs when others really didn't, right? So we actually use photographic references, but we also have to try and take those out of that reality of the otherwise they turn flat. They become flat. So the question is, what is the references that you're using for historical knowledge, historical material? And then how do you put that into space? You look at the wall is this long white gray wall, right? It's flat. And the viewer is walking along this flat wall 70 feet away, right? How do you take that into miles deep of space? How do you take it to outer space? How do you create that? And that is the use of the knowledge of perspective, but also an atmospheric perspective and color treatment. We take things into for example, Kim has been working on this, the Watts Towers. I mean, she gets really very anal in her application because she's so exacting, which I love about Kim, but it's also, I don't have the patience to do perspective and ellipses that go up into the sky. So the Watts Towers are made of ellipses, right? Simon Rodeo, this crazy man who took broken dishes and created this amazing monument, they are ellipses and they go up into the sky above your head, right? Those are perspective lines. They go up to a point of a perspective. The ellipses change shape as they go up. She calculates it, right?
It's really fun.
You know, I wing it, you know, and my ellipses are off. So she's just finished that part of that thing. So we're gonna have a beautiful Watts Towers. I mean, but here's the other thing. Then I'm going to gray it. There's going to be the remnants of a fire that comes from Watts in the uprising, and that will get sent back into space by that change of the smoke. So that's atmospheric perspective. We put it in an atmosphere, so it's both accurate in terms of perspective, and it's also accurate in terms of how your eye changes things at distance, and with the kind of, we got smog in LA. When we get to LA, we've come down from Northern California in the Central Valley, we're changing the light, and it starts to have all this crap in the air, right? And you'll see the color change as we come down to
Oh, I thought that was moisture in the air. You know, because there's really something special about California light, right? It's really a beautiful light. You know, whenever I come here, I'm really excited to see what the light's going to be. You know, because you have that morning light that is kind of subdued and cooler, and then just the way that the light works. And you know, and I think, Judy, the colorations on the way that we put these murals in, we really hit color hard, right? And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about these murals is that they're not gray. Do you see any gray areas in them? You know, we're using a lot of color theory on them.
We use no black.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we're using optical mixing too. So in essence, we're making marks next to marks next to marks. So then that's another way that we encourage the viewer to participate in looking at the painting, because they have to make those vibrating marks come together to be one color. But then it's also that added on to that reflecting light going through each layer, those colors are the way they're interacting is making it even more exciting, right? So that's the difference between us and like Budweiser, right? Murals. Right? You know, it's just the artistic practice that comes into it, right?
Kim, earlier you made mention of the polytab, and I'm just wondering if, Judy, you want to speak to a polytab, you know, for folks that might not know what that is and where that's finding its home in our process.
Well, a number of muralists have actually used the polytab historically, and I think Kent Twitchell actually if you drive down the freeway on the 110, you'll see his symphony orchestra figures, and they were done with polytab very early on in the process, and the application of those were put on the side of a building by Nathan Zackheim, who was a conservator and started this practice, and the idea that we could use a substrate. Is something I used also, but I was using Tyvek. Tyvek is what you would wrap a building in instead of tar paper. They moved to a Tyvek, and the Tyvek is a material you can't tear. Think of a Federal Express envelope, you know, that doesn't tear and that is a very powerful material. Well, polytab is similar. It's the kind of stuff you would put in your collar, right, to stiffen it, and so we're using this very, very thin polytab material as the substrate. The paint is being applied to that substrate. So when it comes off the wall, it's like a layer of paint. It's not much thicker than that. It's very thin and very lightweight. And that can be rolled on big sonotubes, and then the sonotubes will be transported to the site in the river, and then they will be unrolled and applied to the river. And you will not even know that it wasn't painted directly on the river. And that will be, it'll attach to the concrete, and be very, very permanent in the way that it attaches. And that gives us an opportunity to paint in another location, to get out of the river. The river is increasingly dangerous because of the weather conditions, because of the heat. And in 1983, we nearly lost one of our people who went all the way down the river 6 miles. He was hit by she took young people into the channel to try to save our materials because there was a hurricane that came up from Mexico. It was sunny here in Venice, and in the valley, it was pouring rain. And they went into the channel to try to remove our equipment. And they saw a wall of water coming, not a big wall, really a rather short little wall, but enough water, even 6 inches, can move a house if it's 70 feet across. And so it hit the scaffolding, and it took her 6.5 miles, and she had the amazing miraculous event occur in which she was rescued by helicopter on a cable and taken out of the river and lived through it. And Abia is still working with us. She's working with us now. But the fact that she was a miracle that she lived through that was just amazing. So being in the river is really dangerous, and and increasingly the authorities that handle the river opening and closing, I could not necessarily trust them. You know what I mean? They're not totally conscious people, and they're supposed to have us on their chart not to open the floodgates at Hansen Dam, but who would know? You know what I'm saying? It could be an intern, right? Could be, I don't know. We don't trust that, and we're really, huh? It could be a trickster, yes. It could be some kind of bad thing piece of bad luck. At any rate, too hot, too difficult, and bringing ourselves into the river, we have to make an entire army encampment to be in there with food, water, shade. Everything has to be transported, making the production incredibly difficult and hard. And this is actually, I think, a really good solution to working on a substrate and then applying the piece in the site.
Another thing that I, wanted to say about, coming to Spark is Judy has always been somebody that has been interested in pushing muralism with technology. When I first came, one of the trips I came here was right around 2008, when she was working on the Ambassador Hotel mural with the Bobby Kennedy piece. And, she was looking at different ways to print that piece and still, to do the hand-drawn with the painting and the printing that I think became a really amazing piece. And so that's one of the things that I think here at Spark that you all do is you look for different ways to take muralism to a different place than it has been historically and continue the evolution, which I think is really commendable.
Well, thank you. We're nearing our time, and so I wanted to check in and see if there's any questions from the audience that anybody wanted to ask.
Are there any plans to continue the muralist programs in the universities and include them as part of, I guess, artist repertoire? Is that happening?
I think Kim's program is ongoing.
Oh, yeah. And, I'll be offering the class next year. So, yeah.
You have to go to Utah.
Yeah. But it's really pretty. Oh, did you? Okay, so at the University of Utah, we offer a program. What class?
No, there's not another university offering it.
It's really it's a labor of love, and sometimes it takes, again, it's a certain person that wants to do this kind of work, and not all professors want to do this kind of work, right? So you just have to find a couple of us here and there, because Judy came out of the university system.
Well, I would just be more direct about this, but universities do not support this work. Okay.
Yeah.
The idea that, fine art has a very, most fine arts departments do not consider the collaborative work of this scale a significant artistic act. So yes, it's about the individual artists who will fight that system. I taught for 23 years at UCLA and was able to develop a mural program, a mural class and a public art class, but with great difficulty. And the difficulty was overwhelming because the fine arts was actually preparing artists for presentation of their work within the commercial gallery system. How do you make work that is saleable? How do you get work out into the world that will be seen in major museums and so forth? I managed to place the mural classes that I taught within Chicano studies, and one would think that that would be a great place for it. It was not. It was not because all the people in Chicano studies were social scientists, and they were not really convinced that that muralism or that fine arts or the arts were significant within that practice. So it was a struggle all the time to continue the funding, to make it be understood as an important activity and an academic endeavor that was worth achieving. So I think, okay, so here's our ex-vice chancellor of ethnic studies. She'll have something to say about it.
The emphasis on written work, because I'm sure it would be easier to get promoted at UCLA if you had written a page about this future world that you sent me.
Right. You know,
Well, I think actually we pursued the possibility of an expressive practice track for students. And that would have made it possible for them to do a creative endeavor as part of their dissertation or as their dissertation. But what I found was that my students who were creative people, both in theatrically or in visual arts, had to do both. And that meant they had double jeopardy in terms of the work they did. So it wasn't just simply doing a dissertation in writing, which in itself is enough, right? That's a major achievement. But then on top of it, to do a creative endeavor that would be of the level that could be considered doctoral, it meant it was basically doing 2 doctorates, right? And that was our struggle, really, to get that done. And then also the fact that it costs more money. We opened the lab here at Spark as the UCLA Spark Digital Mural Lab, and that was supported by UCLA for a number of years. But every year I would have to make the rationale. Please keep it funded. Please make it possible. And then I would raise all the money outside of the university for the projects my students did. And that was great because we were able to get monies from the hotel and restaurant workers, for example, to do a major piece for them. We did work in the Robert F. Kennedy Learning Center. We did work that was really significant work that was supported outside of the university. But what I think is, here's what I really think. They'll get to the point where they recognize this as one of the most important ways of teaching, that it's project-based teaching, that it's a way of teaching that is transformative, and they'll get there. But it's probably not going to be in my lifetime. I mean, I'm not. It didn't happen in all the years that I struggled to keep it going. So I think there's going to be another significant person or two who's going to come along and start fighting the fight.
It wasn't until the 80s that there were any criteria for creative work to be considered in a portfolio for promotions.
oh yeah, I struggled with that for tenure. I struggled for tenure to get it, you know, because one of the things is too is that muralism is sort of looked down on. So when I first started my class, it was in like 2003, and I had to not only work with the university but also the community. The community like looked at murals as ghettoization, right? You know, as a matter of fact, I painted a mural and the newspaper said, "Oh, this Martinez is turning the city into Mexico." Right? So there was that kind of backlash that came from it. Now, 20 years later, 20 years later, the community I started with, you know, I mean, because I would go to them and I would, you know, my students and I would paint a mural and they would pay us $5 a square foot. And I couldn't pay students, so I took them on trips to LA, to you know, different places. And, but then what happens is that community started to see the value in murals, right? So now, I was in that community for 10 years. So as a university professor, I changed the face of that community. So now they are no longer the center of industry, they're the center of murals. They have 52 murals now. And that's because I got in my car with the guy, he was the Parks and Rec director, and I painted a painting and went to business owners and knocked on the doors and said, "Can me and my students paint this on your wall?" And they'd say, will you put a logo in it? I'd say no, and I'd have to teach them what public art was, what, community-based art is, what we were doing, and teach them. And now they get it, so 20 years later, they all get it, and now they all want it, right? But it took us time, it took tenacity, and me doing song and dance in front of, community leaders to say, give me $2,500, I just want to put this on a wall.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, well, kind of related to all this. I think going to Mexico is the place to go to because Diego Rivera came from Mexico, and when I was growing up, I grew up in Michigan, and the first museum I went to was in Detroit, here at the Institute, that has one of his greatest murals, and it absolutely blew my mind. I never conceived of, could imagine anything like that. So, yeah, go to Mexico. That's where it's at. And Mexico City has the most museums out of any city in the world, actually. We've done that. But my question is, as far as it seems like there's a question about when there'll be academic legitimacy or validation. It seems like it would be closer to me with the boom of street art. Artists like Banksy making headlines all the time, and Shepard Fairey here, and just the boom of street art in general. But I wanted to ask the two of you what your impressions of what's happening now in street art, and how do you perceive it? How does it relate to what you've been doing?
Okay, that's a loaded question, as you might know. I think actually that there is a sanctioning of work that is commercial, right? And I think that what you're talking about is if you look at Banksy and look at JR and you look at some of these people who've been really successful at painting a favela in Venezuela and putting all these paper pieces up where they're doing pasting of works. Recognize that in order to do that, you can't even get into town with that kind of stuff in hand without $40,000 or $50,000, right? There's a lot of backing that's coming to these artists that are primarily not coming out of the inner cities and Black and Latino, and they're not coming from these experiences that are telling that story necessarily. So a certain amount of public art or outdoor muralism and spray can art is being supported. People are hiring young people to spray can something on the side of their building so that it becomes a kind of logo for their business, and that's getting more support. I think where we might make inroads is that these sort of out of the box events like the Great Wall being produced at LACMA. It's going to make a difference in terms of how people perceive this as an important endeavor to teach about and to begin to transform academic application of training. But follow the money source in every case, and it will tell you about who is supporting what. And that will tell you exactly what can get done and what cannot get done. Yes.
What are your thoughts and feelings about, say, like what happened in downtown with the abandoned apartment complexes where all these street artists went in, they broke in, and they tagged these multi-towers with their expression?
My point of view is that the mayor should have come up with that idea, right? And if they would have done that, the city of LA would have gotten the credit for an amazing piece that became, and what's interesting about that is exactly what we were talking about. It became one piece, all contributed by different people, but because they each painted in the same kind of way in these windows or in these, segments of the building. And when you see it, you perceive it from a distance, it's one mural, right? So they dance together in a perfect way.
I actually thought it was paid for when I first heard about
Yeah,
it.
I thought it too. I thought that it must have been paid for. No,
Fantastic.
These guys and their guys, okay, they got together and they saw what each other did and they influenced each other, is what I think happened. But what I'm saying is, imagine that if you had a building that it was abandoned like that, and you had an idea like that, and it was the city of Los Angeles or a big developer that would put something behind it. You could have taken credit for that, and you could have amplified that in such a way that it wasn't a negative experience for, oh, look at these bad kids, they did this thing again. No, how about look at this great piece of art that was done by all these people who worked together in this concerted way. Pilar, you're shaking your head no. Oh, that's true. That's right.
Well, so,
So do you put a coating on or something to preserve the longevity of it? Obviously, it's going to be in the river, so how do you keep it from weathering?
We can't keep it from weathering and aging because there is nothing that can do that. I mean, one of the great mysteries to me is the Reds in Tulum. How did those Reds, what did they do all these thousands of years ago that makes the Reds stay? Well, Diana, who is at the director of the LACMA collection of pre-Columbian art, I attended a lecture that she gave, which gave me some of the, I haven't had a chance to totally interrogate her, but part of it has to do with the use of minerals, right? And the mineral creation of a pigmentation of mineral that created those reds. There isn't a red that exists in contemporary times that could go on a wall and stay for more than 10 years. So yes, we're going to see the mural go down and we're going to lose, it's going to fade. The question is, can we put into place a method of renewal so that we can renew the piece on a regular basis? And that's what we're thinking. We're thinking that there is a way that we've just restored the entire piece. Could we do this as a renewal every 10 years or so, that we keep the color up? And we're using right now a material that we invented here. We use a historic B72, which is, it doesn't mean anything in terms of names and numbers. It basically, we're using it for mummies and, you know, the preservation, a kind of resin preservation of historic materials. And that was created into a clear coat. And we tried to use it on murals and it didn't work. So we have modified that material, and we've developed a mural shield. And this mural shield has ultraviolet screen in it. So we can actually enhance the amount of time that a mural will stay on the wall. It goes through all the layers of paint, consolidates the paint into concrete, and then it actually has a shield for the ultraviolet. And it's actually helping a lot. And not only that, but you can remove graffiti from the wall with water. And so we're working on that material. I mean, I wish we had some research and development money that was enough to actually take us further, but that's how we've done it with our own pennies, with our little bit of money to put into it.
Attach it to the wall.
It does reattachment as well. And that, because it goes through the paint, and then it consolidates the layers of paint, and then attaches again to the concrete. But if we're noticing that murals that are now back to 1975, works that we sponsored through Spark, the very first mural program, we're losing the gesso as the base coat, and that material starts to deteriorate in powder and turn to chalk. And when that happens, our mural shield is not going through that. So we've got to make another analysis, like how do you get through a gesso material, which is the base material you put on a wall before you start to paint, and see if we can't reactivate that material, because it loses its emulsion, what holds the pigmentation together. This is too chemical to talk about, but these things, this application and the advancement of a coating, it is possible for us to get a clear coat on a mural, for it to have an ultraviolet screen, to extend the mural 20 years. We can get stuff up for 40 years, and we can then renew it. And that we need to build into any program or any mural production, a restoration and maintenance program. Now, they haven't yet done that, so.
Well, so thank you. I think we're nearing our time here together. Thank you all so much for those questions. I just wanted to touch base and see, Judy or Kim, if you had any last remarks to round out the night.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Judy. I've enjoyed my time.
I'm so grateful that Kim is here and watch us paint. I would say this little bird here, she's faster than a speeding bullet. Come and watch her paint. And we're making great progress with our team at LACMA. So come and join us and see us.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you that are here in person, and for those of you joining the live stream, thank you so much for Judy and Kim. It's an honor to finally meet you, because we've been working in this collaborative online environment, and so it's such a pleasure to be able to have you in person and be able to have this in-person dialogue. So thank you, and thank you to the entire staff team and staff who this event wouldn't be possible without. And so thank you also for your support of Spark and public art. And so if you haven't already, please consider donating to our programs and projects so that we can continue making public art accessible and engaging in these kind of community programs. So thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Get on our mailing list.